This was the perfect Gibraltar that would never be taken during the entirety of the American Civil War. No matter what ship fought here, what sailor, soldier, or marine approached this location, this was the Confederate stronghold that protected Richmond for all those years. And it only fell as a result of the collapse of Lee's army in Petersburg. Today, we're going to take you here to Drewry's Bluff. So what's a Civil War site without a little noise from the interstate right behind us here? Headed out to Drewry's Bluff, which is a large fort overlooking the James River, a bend in the river at that. And it was the cornerstone for the protection of Richmond, the defenses in and around Richmond. Now this place was such a stronghold that they managed to keep it all the way through the war, up until April of 1865, when the city was abandoned and the sailors that were inside this fort and the other soldiers ended up making their way with the army to Appomattox and fighting along the way as infantry. So we're going to head out here and see what is left of Drewry's Bluff. And yeah, let's check out this place. It's pretty cool. March 17th of 1862, Captain Augustus Drewry was actually out here on this land. And his men were here too, to put in place this fort that's out here. So Drewry's Bluff takes its name from Augustus Drewry. They built the fortification out here, the initial works itself. But in the end, a large portion of the fortifications around here, including the extension, comes from none other than Robert E. Lee's own brother. He was in this fort, he had men here, and they were extending the works out to make this stronghold even better later in the war. When you come out to this location, there is a 1-mile trail that goes out to Drewry's Bluff. Part of it's paved and the rest of it is pretty much gravel all the way out. You can kind of see the gravel behind me there. I just came off the paved portion and we're heading out in this direction straight out to Drewry's Bluff to see the view out there. Now, I've been out here before during the summertime and the trees kind of obscure a lot of the noise. Sorry, it's a little cold out here. Kind of obscure a lot of the noise coming from the interstate over there. And the leaves actually obscure a little bit of the view as well. So we're going to get out here and see what this looks like now that we're in winter, and see how cleared out the area is. And hopefully we can see some more earthen works that are around here that we couldn't see when we were out here last time. Already I'm starting to see features that I haven't seen before. Starting to appreciate some of these big trees that are out here. You can tell this path at one point in time was paved over, completely leading up to the fort itself, but they've taken it all out in favor of the more natural path itself. I don't know how long ago it was that they had it paved, but it rained out here recently, so we have a lot of water coming down through this little creek that runs through the bluff. You can see here in the background. It's just pouring downhill. Obviously that water is not safe for consumption, so, but it is really neat to see it bubbling up down here below in the banks right here at Drewry's Bluff. So there was a pretty big attack that happened out here that actually included the Monitor. Several ships, including the Galena and the Monitor, ends up out here in the river. And during the battle here at Drewry's Bluff, the Confederates actually sunk a bunch of boats, essentially, right off the coast here to try to prevent any kind of a land encroachment down below the bluff. And as a result, they were able to successfully defend this location. Also, it helps being high on a bluff, overlooking everything else. The fight out here was pretty tough, and we're gonna kind of explore a little bit of that. We're gonna take a look at some of these signs that are out here too, and use it to help us tell this story of Drewry's Bluff, which is a very important spot out here in Richmond. It is the reason why Richmond stayed in the hands of the Confederate Army the entire time leading up till April of 1865, because the most vulnerable part of the defense of Richmond was the actual James River. It was the one clear shot that the Union had. If they could overwhelm the James River to get to Richmond, they could take it from the river, and no defenses around could stop them from being able to do that. So here's a neat little sign talking about this place being a permanent post. After that 1862 fight that happened out here, you can see the map drawn out as to exactly what this would have looked like. The CS Army headquarters, the stables, a hotel, chapel, Marine quarters, Navy quarters, and then the fort itself. That stream that we just passed over is right here. For a reference point, that's right down there, that little bridge. And if that's the case, then where we're standing, the hotel, is off in this direction here, somewhere out in those woods. The area that we passed through coming in here would have been the actual headquarters for the Army back there, the armies that were stationed. And at that location right now, it's nothing more than a parking lot and an industrial complex. It's pretty disgusting out there. But out here, it looks probably close to what it would have looked like, except for the metallic fence, you know, the old metal fence out there. And this is where the Marine quarters and the CS Navy quarters are, all throughout this wooded area here, leading towards the river, right out and through that direction. So that's pretty neat stuff. We're gonna head on out here towards the fort and see if we can make out the area where the chapel and the rest of that stuff was. Now, all throughout the 1860s, 62 through 65, civilians were actually coming over to this location here at Drewry's Bluff and having picnics. They were watching the Marines drill. They were basically checking out what was happening over here because it was entertainment to them. At the same time, this location probably had things that they couldn't get their hands on in downtown Richmond. Over here, there were rations, not a whole lot, but there was also entertainment of sorts. There was a band at some times. You know, most armies came with a band. There was a chapel, a Masonic lodge, all kinds of stuff out here that any civilian who was used to having it during their lifetime would want to come out here and experience it. But for the most part, it was Sunday couples coming out here and having a picnic on the bluff and watching the activities going on in and around the fort itself, which also makes for a precarious situation, because if you're a commander inside this bluff, you don't want spies coming. So that was also a big problem during the American Civil War, was the spy network in the South and in the North. Right away, something that catches my eye that's real neat is this sign just as you start to enter Drewry's Bluff, the fort itself. There's a sign right here that talks about the chapel. And when you read the sign, it tells you that you are standing, right here it says, you are now standing near the steeple of the chapel, looking towards the small cemetery in the foreground image. So, if we're to gather this correctly, that little cemetery right there would be right here, off in the little small distant plot of land right here. In this picture, a couple of pictures were taken here at Drewry's Bluff, and I'm hoping to find the photo online from the Library of Congress so that maybe I can put it in this video. But it talks about the chapel's rustic graveyard. And it says that Sergeant Frank L. Smith, who drowned in 1865 while removing artillery from the Confederate forts, his headstone is actually captured in that photograph. And you can clearly see his name on the headstone. It was a reminder that things out here weren't always great. Soldiers were dying, sailors were dying. That one soldier there, Frank L. Smith, ends up dying in the river below as he's trying to remove ordnance. There was lots of ways to die in the American Civil War. It wasn't just by bullets, you know. Majority of the time it was sickness. This cemetery that's out here, it's still, to me, it's still a very hallowed ground because it's a burial place for soldiers. But according to the sign, all of the bodies were removed at some point in time and they were reinterred somewhere else in another location. So another tidbit of neat information out here at Drewry's Bluff at this location. So here we are at that sign, and that is the chapel pointed in this direction. And if we are, so we're on the opposite side of where this is right now, and that's the cemetery facing out front here. This is the direction of the photograph. So, if that's the case, then we are facing in this direction here from the steeple. And we are looking at the cemetery just right out front here at this location right there. That's some real neat stuff. And it is stationed right outside these tall walls here at the fort. Now, there weren't too many places like this in the American Civil War for the Confederate soldier. Even during the times of the siege at Petersburg itself, because this particular location had just about everything you'd want in regular, everyday, normal life. It had that chapel, Masonic lodge. It had, places to sit down and eat, actual lodging and things like that. Most Confederate soldiers' lives were spent in trenches or inside of a half flap of a tent. They didn't have the comforts of home or anything like that. But the soldiers and sailors that were out here, and the Marines from the Confederate military, had a lot of the very things that you would see inside of a normal acting military base. It's pretty interesting to see all of this. And the walls I'm looking at right now, they're huge. They're tall. I'll turn this around so you can see what I'm looking at. You can see all the structures and the formations are still in really good shape out here. So before it rains, I'm going to try to get a lot of this in the video. So there's one of those large gun emplacements. Now, whenever this fort was opened up, they had huge seacoast guns that were placed out here and in places like this. And they would have to build a structure for it and set those guns up on that structure. Well, during that first conflict that happened out here, firing that first round out of that massive seacoast gun caused it to break off of its attachments. And it was no longer able to be fired until near the end of the battle. There were other guns that actually failed out here as well. So it wasn't necessarily the artillery inside this fort that saved this fort as much as it was the location where it was at, the soldiers, sailors, and Marines that were on the inside here protecting the fort, and the idea to scuttle those ships down below to protect the banks from being attacked from below. Also, it keeps the ships from sailing freely past this fort because they were scuttled pretty much all the way across. It was blocking the river itself. Those ships could not go too much farther. So for places as important as this, I'm definitely a big fan of these wooden fences. It says area closed. It's got it blocked off. A lot of these earthen forts have been worn down over the years, and this earthen fort here is so dangerously close to industrial complex. I'm surprised that it was able to survive all these years and be enveloped into the Richmond National Battlefield Park. It's pretty neat. And I'm about to go up on it looks like a catwalk up here and look down over the river. This is going to be something else. All right, let's get up here and see what we got for a view. Glad we could take you guys along with us today to check this out. Hopefully the wind's not too much for us up here. As far as, man, that is something else. Wow, this is beautiful. Man, look at this. That river bend all the way back in this direction here too. This is amazing. And I could just make out Richmond way off in the distance over there. This is something else. And in that river below me right there, that's where the USS Monitor was. It's just right out there. This is amazing. So standing up here, I had to flip this camera around so you guys can see what we're looking at even better. Now obviously, we have the river, which is an amazing view in and of itself out here. on these banks. But then when you flip back around, the military nerd in you also is fulfilled, because you're at a high standing point here where you can see the works coming across, you can see the formation of the works through there. There's an actual gun emplacement that they've kind of restructured and rebuilt and placed a gun up there. So you'd be able to see exactly what this looks like when they're firing these guns. And then even better, they have a drawing facing the river and the gun in the background. It kind of gives you movement to the action happening here on this battle on May 15th of 1862. Okay, now is the moment of truth. This sign is somewhat falling apart, but does the button work?
March 1862.
Yes.
Union gunboats and the ironclad Monitor, one of the strongest warships in the world, prowled the waters off Hampton Roads at the mouth of the James River. The way to Richmond seemed open. A concerned Confederate general wrote, "No time should be lost in sinking insurmountable obstacles in the James. Nothing but physical obstructions will stop the Union ships." That same month, Captain Augustus Drewry was assigned to build fortifications nearby along the Richmond-Petersburg Turnpike. Captain Drewry commanded the South Side Heavy Artillery and owned a large plantation that included this bluff. When Confederate officers recognized the need for a fort to protect the river, Captain Drewry offered his land and suggested that his men would help build it. Guided by Confederate engineers, black laborers and Drewry's artillerymen constructed this fort to defend the capital of the Confederacy. By May, the Union Army pushed toward Richmond by land. On May 10th, a Union flotilla.
So now we're out here overlooking the James River from the position of where the Galena, the Monitor, and 3 other ships would approach. The actual blockade, if you will, if you can see that little bend in the river right there, the bend in land, they would have scuttled ships and stone cribs and all kinds of stuff right out through here to keep that ship from coming right up onto the bluff or getting through. And when the Galena headed up this way, the Galena could not get through that stuff. So the only thing that they could do was go broadside and start firing towards this fort. And what that means is when a ship is headed this way in those days, to go broadside, it has to turn like this. So the ship's headed in this direction, and then it turns broadside and starts firing its guns over in this direction. But what they didn't realize was not only was this fort well equipped to fight back, but the banks itself down below here, the banks would have actual sailors and Marines and soldiers down there with rifles or guns, muskets that is, aimed and ready to fight. And so they started raking the decks of the ships and firing at them. The guns up here fired a lot of shots towards that area too. And according to the information from the National Park, 27 shots were actually fired into or through that ship and ended up causing 27 casualties as a result. So not a major death bringer, I guess you could say, this battle here, but it was definitely an exclamation point, and it stopped those ships from getting up this river back in this direction here towards Richmond. And because of that, never again was Richmond actually approached or even attacked in such a way to try to take Richmond itself via the James River. So it's pretty amazing. Now there was another attack that came close to this area, and that attack actually happened as a part of Butler's actual attack, the Bermuda 100. So, and we'll go around these signs now and start seeing what else we got to talk about. So like I was saying before, the Monitor actually has history here at this bluff. And the history is basically it was the last actual advance, the last combat of this ship. The Monitor is out there way off in the distance, and it is bringing its gun to bear, and it is firing over here like crazy. Well, the gun's out here, just like this one in this pit, is firing towards the Monitor. The sailors and soldiers and Marines out here can see that that gun and its rounds are bouncing off the deck of the Monitor. It's not impacting the Monitor, it's not causing a problem. So they decide that they're going to then turn their focus towards the USS Galena. Galena is very, very fragile compared to the Monitor itself, and the attacks are very effective. The captain aboard the Galena decides that they are going to end up turning that ship around, and they are going to call off this fight because they can tell that they're not going to be able to break through, and they're not affecting this fort in the way that they would hope that they could. And that is a 4-hour battle. Well, the Monitor makes its way back down the river, and unfortunately, December 31st of 1862, it sinks in the Atlantic in a gale off the coast of the Cape Hatteras. For us, we've actually had one of the members of the museum over there, the CEO, if you will, on our channel, talking to us about preservation of the Monitor and the pieces that are there. So go check out that live stream that we had a while back. And if you get a chance and you're in the Hampton Roads area, go check out the museum. They only charge, I think, $1 or $2 to go see that place. So it's real neat American Civil War history and naval history. So we have Medal of Honor recipients of the fight that happened here aboard the ships. And they were promoted and given the Medal of Honor for the actions here and their heroism at this location. I'm going to read the information off of this sign because it definitely tells the story better than I could ever tell the story. When an artillery shell passed through the Galena, killing and disabling most of the crew serving her 100-pounder Parrott rifle, Corporal John Mackey rallied his comrades shouting, "Come on, boys, here's a chance for the Marines." After clearing up the debris and removing the injured, Mackey's team resumed firing the huge cannon until the Galena withdrew. For his courage and leadership, the 27-year-old New Yorker became the first U.S. Marine to receive the Medal of Honor. Charles Kenyon, a 22-year-old sailor from New York, was severely burned while clearing a bent priming wire from the bow of the gun. Kenyon returned the gun to continue the fight, ignoring his injuries and the Confederate sharpshooters whose rifles swept the exposed decks of the Galena. Jeremiah Reagan, a 30-year-old quartermaster from Boston, served as a captain of the No. 2 gun and also stood firm in the face of horrendous shelling and deadly sharpshooting. Kenyon and Reagan were among the first members of the U.S. Navy to be awarded the Medal of Honor. This all happens out here. And right there is a picture of John F. Mackey in uniform of the Naval Veterans Organization. His Medal of Honor is actually displayed. It says it's second from the left in the row. And isn't that something? Hoorah, Navy and Marines. This is pretty cool history out here at Drewry's Bluff. Now, what's a medal to a sailor, soldier, Marine, or airman? Well, coming from a sailor, nothing really. It is a recognition of an action that you have taken, whether it be serving honorably and doing your job, or going above and beyond, or doing something heroic, something that someone has seen as being honorable and having heroism attached to it. A loosely used term these days, hero. Well, sailors, soldiers, and Marines and airmen all know going forward in the future that the thing that's really worth the most is the action itself. It's the story that you tell people, the lessons that you've learned from it. And a lot of times, these veterans that have done amazing things, that have earned the Medal of Honor, for example, their stories live inside their heads. And a lot of times they don't tell those stories to other people because they're too painful to remember. Those medals, they hang up in display cases and they get passed down through the years, and no doubt these Medal of Honor recipients here, their medals are probably in museums around the country, which is an honorable thing to do. But I can only imagine what was going through the minds of these young sailors on those ships out there as they're being bombarded by this fort. War is a cruel thing. and it can cause people to do things that they never thought they would be able to do, good and bad. So that platform there allows you to be able to see that gun up close and in person. And then obviously there's walls right beyond there that you can kind of get real close to and look over the edge. And then a sign that reminds you, do not climb on these fort walls. Not only is it dangerous because of the overlook and the distance down below, but imagine this being here for another 100 years for future generations to come out here and learn about this very pivotal moment in American history. It won't be here if people continue to climb on them, so proceed with caution. So this sign has a really neat photo on it, and I'll see if I can't get a copy of it to put in this video. If you can make it out there, there's either a sailor or a soldier standing in front of a bomb-proof. Well, what's more neat about that is, here's your bomb-proof. We're actually standing at the location where this soldier is pictured in the doorway of the bomb-proof. And that sunken down hole here, that is the deep depression of the bomb-proof as it goes up under the ground. And you can see the large portion here of this bomb-proof where it's kind of collapsed in on itself. And that's, time can cause that. Also, whenever they took these forts over, the Army would cause that. The Army would come in, take anything that they needed, and then they would collapse those bomb-proofs so that they couldn't be used in the future against the Army and the Navy. So again, here's that photograph we're talking about, and there's that soldier just hanging out in the sunlight right there in front of that bomb-proof, very well built. And there's a gun that's placed off here, and we are looking at the bomb-proof hole right there. So there's the hole, the entrance, and then straight on up to the actual bank itself of the bomb-proof. So that's real neat. It's amazing stuff here. Captain Augustus Drewry, commanding Southside Artillery, quoted Sergeant Samuel A. Mann, "Don't a man leave for the quarters, for I want you to fix up these parapets that have been knocked down, and those sandbags torn to pieces must be replaced, and get ready for them, for the boats will probably be back here again in 2 hours." That's a quote about the fight that happened out here. So right over here, off the path just across from the bomb-proof, we have a sign up that says "Caved In Powder Magazine." So there we are again, another location that's been caved in over the years, or purposely caved in after it was taken. And then we have this nice location up here that probably overlooks the river, which is where we're headed right now. Let's see what we can see. Now this is what I'm used to seeing out here. All this vegetation. But the reason why this is important is to get over to these walls and to see the defenses down here. I mean, look at this stuff. I'm gonna try to draw this back a little bit. There's that huge wall that just comes up off the side here. Because even if those ships make their way up and somehow they're able to land, well, now they're going to have to come up over here and get into these outer walls and climb the banks and then get inside of this massive fort. Look at this place. And in 1862, most of these walls are probably not here. This is later work that has been done to strengthen this location and to make it impossible for the Army and the Navy to come in here and take this place. Drewry's Bluff was a beast. They meant business with this place, and they knew that the bend here in the river was kind of the key to protecting Richmond. You don't build a fort like this unless you intend on keeping it forever, which is what they were wanting to do. But of course, when Petersburg fell and Richmond collapsed, and the soldiers were told to evacuate along with the citizens and the government of the Confederacy, this place had to be evacuated, because you're not going to leave sailors, soldiers, and Marines behind in this fort unless you need them here. And of course, they didn't need them here any longer. Richmond was going to fall, and they needed every person that they could get in the ranks of that army, and they swelled up the ranks with the people from the defenses around Richmond. But eventually, a lot of those soldiers, sailors, and Marines would be captured along the way in places such as Sailor's Creek and small conflicts along the way, and of course at Appomattox, leading to the end of the Army of Northern Virginia and the surrender of those forces there in Appomattox. So now I'm on the opposite side of where that catwalk is that we were at earlier, and I'm looking back towards it, and the view is just amazing. Just the sheer size of this fort, it just captures the imagination, the attention. I mean, look all behind me here at all of this. This is something else. All these walls, the hills. You can almost imagine the soldiers and sailors inside here doing their everyday jobs, keeping things clean and orderly, stacking cannonballs and things like that, keeping watch on the walls to make sure that the approaches are cleared and that there's no ships coming in. And they were probably on edge for quite some time, knowing that the Monitor and the Galena had been out there in May of 1862. So it's a nerve-wracking feeling, probably for them. It's like being a sitting duck. You're inside a fort waiting on an attack. And of course, while you're in here, the entire world outside you is still going on. Noises from Richmond can probably be heard over here. Small civilian boats are going up and down this river. You have people coming in and out of here every day from the town, probably bringing in news of Robert E. Lee's victories in Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, and then eventually their massive defeat at Gettysburg. And so the people that are inside this fort are living through the Civil War from the lens of a regular everyday person, but knowing at any point in time they could be called upon to put their lives on the line and fight against the United States military. It's a pretty scary thing for some people. So how does this bluff get its supplies in and out of here without having a situation like a Trojan horse, if you will, or people attacking it with wide open gates? Well, you have to have a path. And I'm about to cross over a path right now that's got a sign out front called the Covered Way. You can barely make out what that sign says or the picture that's on it, but essentially it is like an entrance to the fort from the town, if you will. And it used to be a tunnel. It was tunneled out, and the bridge over top where the guards could actually stand up here and walk back and forth. But people could come in and out, and they could move supplies in and out of here and quickly close that entrance down if they're being attacked. So I'm going to take some videos from up here so you can see just how tall this wall is that I'm looking at, and the actual tunnel. That's portions of it. The tunnel doesn't exist, but the actual wall where the tunnel was still exists today. That's a pretty neat experience. Every Civil War nerd fiber in me is excited to be up here on this bridge. and to see the location. And as we pass around the corner here, you can see the depth where it actually goes down. I'm going to go down to the lowest level here so you can see that too. And here we are. That's our entry point right there, obviously minus the trees and all that stuff. But this is how we're getting supplies in and out of this fort. And then once you enter this flat land here, you're now on fort grounds where the military is doing its job. Some pretty cool stuff. Now, taking a look at this photograph here that's on this sign, you can clearly see all the bomb proofs and things that are inside this this fort, and the guns that are overlooking the river, and the land is pretty much cleared out there. And one Georgia man called this place a perfect Gibraltar and said it would never be taken. And he was right. It wasn't taken until the actual army collapsed itself. But unfortunately for many of those sailors and Marines that were inside this army here, inside this fort, they would end up with Lee's army, and the majority of them would be taken captive at Sailor's Creek. So for the many, many years that they were able to survive out here on this fort overlooking the river, the end was as simple as one battle that turned out to be a big flop for the Confederate military. Now, I imagine that living out here was probably not the easiest thing in the world because supplies are dwindling. You're constantly worried about being attacked. You know that Petersburg is under attack every day. You could probably hear some of the noise off in the distance from some of the fighting that's happened out there. But imagine being here and comfortable knowing that you're pretty safe, and then being told you have to evacuate this place. Your bed is here, your barracks is here, all the comforts of life that you had built up inside this fort is about to go away. You're about to be on a campaign real quick, and if you haven't been on a campaign before, Army life is pretty tough, you know, especially for sailors that are used to being on the ships, not doing a lot of hiking. These guys are sore-footed, and who knows what supplies they have with them, and they are making their way out of this fort towards their destiny. And eventually, they are part of the units that are captured out there at Sailor's Creek and taken to prisoner war camps. And the craziest part about that is, had those units been able to survive or move on to Appomattox, they would have probably been allowed to go back home almost immediately. But instead, a lot of those people that were taken captive were put in prisoner of war camps, and they were held there until at least June, and some of them far beyond that, until it was all cleared up and they were paroled and they had taken their oath of allegiance. I'm out here at another national park sign just as I'm about to leave this fort, and it's talking about a hot shot and wooden ships. Now, if you've ever been to a fort like the one in St. Augustine, the Spanish fort that's down there, and you've seen their hot shot, it still exists. It's made of some sort of stones or clay or something like that, but it was for old warfare tactics against wooden ships. And at the time, the Navy was starting to upgrade to new tactics. It was starting to build ironclads and things like that. It made stuff like a hot shot furnace an obsolete item, something that was not necessary anymore. But inside this fort, they actually created a hot shot. And on the sign, you can see that hot shot right there. It's basically a furnace, a clay furnace, and that would have been that small lump in the ground right there, just on the opposite side of this large hill. That's all that's left of it today. So here we are. You can see that hot shot furnace right there. Cannonballs off in the distance. There's a gun over here on the left-hand side. And then that large bank that's up here. And this is the area where the catwalk is right in front of us. So there's our bank and our catwalk. Real neat, right? Here's the gun emplacement that's off in this direction. You can see the gun facing here. That's off here. And then you have the large wall right there. That's this large wall right here. And then that lump right there is that hot shot furnace, which happens to be that small lump right there. Let's see if we can't draw in just a little bit. And there it is, that lump in the ground. There is your furnace. So we'll back out. So off the beaten path, you kind of can't tell that this is a location you're supposed to go to because all the leaves are covering it up. But as you come up through here, it's clear to see that there is a sign that the National Parks put up out here that's extremely important to the story at Drewry's Bluff. This sign shows a picture off in that direction there of the Marine Corps camp for the Confederate States Army. They were permanently stationed out here, and Lloyd J. Beale would end up being their commandant. Lloyd J. Beale, as it says here on the sign, served in the Black Hawk and Seminole and Mexican Wars before rising to the rank of major, and then he was appointed commandant of the Marine Corps in 1861, and he served in that capacity until the end of the war. He ends up dying in Richmond in 1887. He says of the Corps was composed of enlisted men, many of whom were old soldiers and commissioned officers, a number of whom had seen service before the U.S. Marine Corps and elsewhere. The Corps was thoroughly trained and disciplined, and in all encounters with the enemy, the officers and men were conspicuous for their courage and good conduct. They would call this Camp Beale right out here. And as you can see on the sign, they built structures. But today, Camp Beale is part of an industrial complex's property. There is no way for you to get out there to explore any of those grounds, and the National Park can't put up signs over there or identify anything or probably even do any research out there. So it's off limits as far as I can tell. They do have this fence here that looks like at one point in time it possibly was completed, but now it's drawn back, and they have a sign over there that says danger, there's a sharp drop off, and you can actually see some of the earthworks out here that are extended out from Drewry's Bluff and the fort over there at Drewry's Bluff. So this is pretty neat. Oh, look at that. We are seeing something else around here that I wouldn't have seen had I not walked out here. There's a nice sign. And we will not be going past that fence. That is not our property. So there's the sign for Fort Darling. And of course, Fort Darling is off in that direction over there. It's pretty interesting that the sign is posted right here. Unless there was a road or something back in this direction that would have allowed for people to travel out here and see this. And I don't see anything over that fence that makes me think that, although I'm sure other people know a lot more about this place than I do. Really cool. I sure am glad I went off the beaten path a little bit to see this. And that is a massive drop over there. It's about as close to the edge as you're going to get to see the river. It is a huge drop, just straight off and down into the river, rolling right downhill. I would not want to fall off of there, so we will stay away from that and continue on our trail. Imagine those Marines were out there every day drilling, probably firing shots and things like that, taking target practice to try to ensure that they are sharp and ready for the fight. I do find it amazing that they had so many Marines in this area, and the Marines weren't sent forward from here, according to the park information, to take place in any of the real fights that were going on around the area. It's kind of shocking to me, but I guess the Marines back in those days were a little bit different than the Marine Corps today. You think of the Marines today as the first in the fight, ready and willing. In those days, a lot of them served on ships, and they fought from the ships, which is why they were Marines in the first place. They were being deployed from the ship, and that's why they are also a part of the U.S. Navy, even though they're their own brand of fighting men, if you will, men and women. So now, according to the park signs from back inside the fort, that map that was drawn, this area out here, wrapping on through here, as you come inside the fort or in the park itself, this is that military camp that's happening out here. This is where these soldiers are on the outside, not the Marines, not the Navy, but the U.S. Army regulars. They're out here in these fields drilling and preparing and likely transferring in and out of this area to the Army for the fights that are coming. Can't get much better than this. Overlooking the James River, being here at Drewry's Bluff, talking about multiple types of history. We're not just talking about the Army, we're talking about the Navy and the Marine Corps. We're talking about the Confederacy and the Union, ironclad ships. I mean, this place has it all. Not to mention the small little town, military town, that was built up and around the actual fort itself. And standing in the footprints of where the chapel would have been, the cemetery for the men that died out here, this is some real neat stuff. I couldn't ask for a better time or a better place to cover. I've been to many different Civil War forts, many different locations, and Drewry's Bluff, even though it's tucked away in one of the worst parts of town that I could think of, this industrial complex with one terrible small business after another that's run down and falling apart, and all the noise that you can still hear from the interstate, even all the way out here a mile into the woods, it's still one of the best places you can go to learn about the fort, to learn about the naval actions around Richmond, and about the Navy that would be today. Without those ironclads, without those ideas that came up during the American Civil War, the United States Navy would not be what it is today. So, if you get a chance to come out here, I highly encourage you to make that walk and take your time when you get inside this fort. Take your time. Read up on it. Well, that's all for us for now, and we're moving on to the next adventure. Until next time, this is History with Waffles. Remember, we have an event coming up in Gettysburg. It's the Gettysburg Film Festival. That's that first week in April. We hope to see everybody out there. So if you get a chance, come on out, hang out with us. We'll see you there.